Welcome to Brain in a Vat. It's a very special episode of Brain in a Vat today because Jason won't be joining us, but our long-standing executive producer of the show, Jimmy Mullen, will be the co-host. And we are going to have a wonderful discussion with Father Afonso about autonomous weapon systems. Would you like to start with a thought experiment?
So we need to imagine two countries at war. In one, so state A and state B, to put it simply. And in state B, we have non-state actors. So what we call terrorist organizations operating in state. So we have the state A considers these non-state actors legitimate targets, but they find themselves in a region that is very dangerous for ground soldiers. So they think in applying, in the first situation, an autonomous weapon system. So a system that is able to identify, select, and engage the military targets without human supervision. The second situation is, although State A wants to deploy this autonomous weapon system before the lethal engagement, requests an authorization or permission from the military commander. What I want to add is that the autonomous weapon system, because of the velocity and variety and volume of data, it was giving to the military commander the precise location where these non-state actors were.
Fonzo, I just want to clarify a little bit. What do you have in mind with regard to this autonomous weapon system? Is it a small weapon, or is it something like the Terminator? Because I think a lot of people picture the latter.
So we are far from the Terminator possibility in terms of what artificial intelligence can do at the moment. So we are talking about a possibility of having drones, as we know today, or micro drones. So micro drones is actually my area of expertise. So it's drones that are below 200 grams. And so what is relevant is that in the traditional drone, we have a drone pilot that is remote located somewhere. And in these drones, once the system is activated, the human operator disappears from all the process of identifying, selecting, and engaging the target. So that is the big difference. So in this case, we have a state A that is thinking in deploying this autonomous system, whatever is the size. Is that legitimate or not from the legal or moral perspective?
The common trope is that by removing people from warfare, you're actually creating more entropy. And so there's a possibility that an autonomous weapon system might misfire and kill a civilian when they're executing these non-state actors. But what about just the idea that technology might be able to better identify these targets with facial recognition data? And you say that they actually locate the non-state actors in a specific location. So it seems like, let's say from my end, it's a lot safer to allow these tiny autonomous weapon systems to go execute the specific targets and avoid any civilian deaths with giant missiles.
These systems represent a big advantage for states in the sense that they gather and process data in a time frame that is impossible for any human operator. So that is the great advantage. And also with the development of technology of warfare, not only AI, but technology in general, it's true that the weapons today are much more precise than they used to be 20 or 50 years ago, which allow the reduction of collateral damage. That there is less civilian victims, less destruction for civilians. On the other side, we have the buts. So first is if we allow these systems to be opened, in this sense means that the system is open to new data from the environment. That is, so the human operator that design and program the system doesn't have the control of all the data. So we can have data that we do not know from the environment, from the battlefield, from whatever is the sources of this data. And the problem is if the system commits an error of software. So we have three types of situations. Malfunction, like any weapon can malfunction, but these weapons open our eyes for another horizon, is the fact that software, as we have errors of judgment, software can make the way he processes data, the way he reads reality, so what the roboticists call semantic errors, the way the system is processing the information actually does not correspond to reality and conducts to something unlawful, to a war crime, killing a civilian instead of a combatant. So that is the problem. From the technical point of view, these systems promise much more accuracy and efficiency, and also less expenses for a state because they are cheaper than having troops on the ground. On the other side, we have problems regarding what happens if one of these systems fails and end up causing what would be considered a war crime if the action would be committed by a human agent. So that is the, the problem that states are debating since 2000.
It seems that human beings have a discomfort with handing over control to machines. So,
Mm.
in the early days of the elevator, you had a person who would stand in the elevator and he would operate it for you. And he would press the buttons and he had a little switch and a pull. People said, "Oh, I feel very comfortable because there's this driver in the car." Now we would think that's absurd. We think that, of course, the elevator, can get us there on its own. And we've had a debate recently about self-driving cars. People don't like the idea that you could have this car that drives on its own, that picks up all the information in the environment. They think, what happens if the car killed someone, and ran over some innocent person? Um, but if it is the case that machines are going to do a much better job at reducing collateral damage, let's say, for example, in our car case, human beings are going to kill each other in car accidents on a very regular basis. South Africa, where I live, happens to be one of the worst places to die from road deaths because of human error. Um, if the machines are going to do a better job, they're going to kill some civilians, they're going to make mistakes, there'll be malfunctions, there'll be systemic errors within the software, but there'll be less. Uh, should we welcome the technology? So if we think about it in the wartime case, we say, well, occasionally what's going to happen is we're going to send in our autonomous weapon system and it's going to misidentify a target. It's going to tell us that these are the terrorists, and actually it's made some kind of error, and it's going to kill some civilians. But humans do that all the time, and so it'll do it less often. So should we welcome it if on a consequentialist framework, there's less murder of innocents and more killing of people that have it coming?
So it's true that I think the majority of international lawyers tend to go to a very utilitarian perspective when they want to defend these systems. It is, well, we know we have a risk that this might happen, but if we look to the global situation, we will be better off using these systems. That is my first problem. So if the laws of war actually demand an utilitarian perspective of the laws of war, because, you know, if a human soldier causes the death of civilians, of course, we need to analyze the circumstances in which the human soldier has killed people. But then looking to a normal situation, if the soldier simply kills someone out of stress and because he panics and so on, that can be taken into consideration as mitigating circumstances, but he will find some kind of reprimand or legal accountability. If we go into these machines, my philosophical problem, if I may talk in these terms, is if we are scapegoating machines. So civilians die on the battlefield, and you say, oh, the machine didn't work well. And while, for instance, in the example that you were giving of the self-driving cars, if there is a mistake and the car kills someone, there is insurance, what we call tort liability, but that doesn't exist in international law or in the context of war. So I just find troubling. I don't know. I don't have a solution and a correct answer, but I just think that the utilitarian approach doesn't solve lots of philosophical problems that we have underneath that underpin the legal thought. And I'm slightly scared if we go to a too much pragmatic approach to the laws of war. Then a second problem that I have is that actually the most conservative people that, by conservative, I mean the people that we need to wait and see the capabilities of these systems, are roboticists and military people. So there is a recent article by Peter Lushenko, who is a military commander of the US Army, that conducted a survey about autonomous weapon systems, and the majority of military commanders vote against autonomous weapon systems. And the reason they present is when we are deciding on the principle of distinction, meaning deciding who is a civilian and a combatant, to delegate these kind of decisions for a machine, I don't feel comfortable with that. So it's the military responsibility and morality that actually is holding back states. And the second thing is the roboticists that call our attention to the fact that when we allow machines to optimize outcomes, so to have access to new data, to actually, we give a mission to the system, but the system can calculate how the mission should be performed. We are opening the Pandora box. And what I find here is that the autonomous weapon system, which is fascinating at the same time, but is a multidisciplinary topic. So you have the law that comes at the end of the chain of justification, but you have philosophy and roboticists speaking before the lawyers, because sometimes we don't understand the language of roboticists and we start talking, oh, these machines will be more efficient. But are we sure? Because the roboticist, for instance, Stuart Russell, maybe one of the most important roboticists of the time involved with autonomous weapon systems, he says is going to be a Pandora box. We won't be able to control these systems. For instance, imagine a situation where the military commander, for some reason, understands that the system is performing oddly. And so if the military commander realizes that something is going wrong, the time frame that he has to act and deactivate the system sometimes will be impossible for the military commander to act before the system does something wrong. So it's not just the question of saying, oh, well, these systems we'll have the military commander supervising the system. But the problem is, will the military commanders be able to act efficiently in order to prevent war crimes in the time framework that he has? Because these systems work in a speed that normally nobody will know when they will act and engage the target. So that is, I think sometimes, I have these personal questions, but these systems can be much better, right? But it's just the outcome that we need to look at, or also the means and possible risks that these weapons can open us to.
I'm trying to understand how different autonomous weapon systems would really be on the battlefield in terms of control, though, because I mean, we've all heard the saying, war is hell. And we know that the haze of war can often blind our moral judgments and make us emotional creatures. And of course, there's the idea that you can remove the emotion from the battlefield, and we do need roboticists to see if you can control them. But the Pandora's box is interesting because I think that we're already at the point where people are sitting in a room on the other side of the world, pressing a red button to bomb 10,000 people. And it isn't a matter of actually being on the ground and taking orders and then, clearing through a building to try to execute one target. It's all happening very quickly already. So I'm just wondering how much further autonomous weapon systems would really be compared to what we already have before us with drones and emotions on the battlefield themselves.
one of the things that I really wanted to know is why the governments are so interested in investing in autonomous weapon systems. Of course, uh, once it's because of the data that these systems can process, but also the problems which I was not expecting. It was really interesting to find this reality. So if we compare the studies regarding ground soldiers and drone pilots regarding post-traumatic stress disorder, the drone pilots have a much increased level of post or PSTD. And why? Well, the drone pilots develop what a soldier cannot develop, which is empathy for the enemy. Because a drone pilot may surveil a group of terrorists for weeks or months, and aside the fact that they see actually these guys doing bad things and dealing with weapons, killing, they also see the good neighbor, the good father, the good mother, and then at the end, they receive this order that they have no control whatsoever. Press the red button. And so the drone pilots find levels of distress and emotional distress, which a ground soldier that doesn't have any contact with the enemy, much more acute. And this is one of the problems. So, and when you said regarding pull the red button. So that opens a new problem. And I think this is where the utilitarian perspective also messes a bit with my way of thinking, is a problem known as automation bias. So, the machines work well 99% of the time. So if I receive data from a system that is telling me Afonso is a terrorist, the military commander, even if he has questioned if Afonso is or not a terrorist, he won't question the system. And sometimes it doesn't have even the possibility of questioning the system because it doesn't control the data that the system received. And so basically, the human operators just confirm what the system is telling them to do. And so this is the problem of the automation bias, which is a very serious problem because we had a crisis between the United States and Russia, many years ago in the 80s, the famous case Petrov. So the Petrov was a Russian soldier on duty, and suddenly the computers are telling Mr. Petrov that the United States activated their nuclear weapons and Russia would be attacked by the United States. And Petrov sees all the information that the computers are telling him, and so he had to activate the defenses from Russia. However, he thought that the situation was so odd, taking into account the negotiations at the time between the United States and Russia, that he actually suspended the defense mechanism. What was discovered is that the system made an error. And actually, thank God that it was there and suspended the nuclear attack. But this was a unique case. And in a more, or let's say, in a less sophisticated technological world, because he could see, well, this probably is too much. But when we're going to have, like little mosquitoes or periquitos, there is a very good film on a British and American film, which is Eye in the Sky, that they show all the technology that the UK deploys on the battlefield, like little periquets and little birds bugs that are introduced inside of the houses. They register film, they register audio. So the access of information that before would be impossible for troops to have. So when a military commander receives an information, this guy or this group of guys are terrorists, they should be targeted. I wonder what is the level of control that the military commander will have. Then the other problem with automation bias is the the bias of the algorithms. So, of course, an algorithm and special neural networks, which is a type of algorithm that these systems use, they will process and select possible outcomes based on the data they receive. But imagine that we will design an algorithm to see um, who of the three of us would be the terrorist. So, of course, you would consider that all the white men, because in this reality we are just white men, the white men would be the terrorists. And so the problem is that the algorithm will process the data according to the data that was given to the system. And he will develop patterns. For instance, here we are all men, all white. So women would not be terrorists. Black people will not be terrorists. And so there is also a very weak side to these algorithms when the data stop being controlled or checked by human operators.
So one of the concerns you could have would be about accountability. So you mentioned the case of the soldier who makes an error, who kills an innocent civilian, and you can have a trial and you can ask them questions in a military court and find out whether they did it culpably, whether they did it intentionally, and you can come to some decision about their accountability. And the difficulty with the AI is that it's hard to tell why it did what it did. There's we had an episode with David Boonin where we talked about the use of AI in sentencing and something that is used in American courts. And someone brought a challenge because they were given a sentence of 10 years being the maximum sentence. And so they said to the judge who'd imposed it, well, why did you impose 10 years? And he said, well, the AI gathered data about you. It uses a whole range of different metrics, none of which I'm aware of, but it's things like your possibility of committing a future offense. And so it told me 10 years, but I can't tell you why it told me that. And so he challenged it on the grounds that it was unconstitutional, that he would have some kind of right to reasons to know why he got this 10-year sentence. Now, as a South African, I have sympathy for this because in a criminal court in South Africa, if you are convicted of a crime, a judge will write a decision and tell you what laws he used based on to find you liable and based on the sentencing. So, well, you did the following things. Here are these other cases where people who did similar stuff got the sentence, and this is why I'm giving you this. But in America, that's not what you find. In America, what you find is you've got a jury, and the jury decides this is what you get, and it's a black box. So the idea is we assume that it's some kind of just process, but we have no access to the inner workings of the jury, and no juror can be held liable. And a lot of Americans feel very comfortable with this idea that, well, the black box told you that you're getting 10 years, so you're getting 10 years. And so maybe that's the situation that we're going to be in with the AI in terms of war crimes. So we know that some crime is committed in the sense that the innocent civilian is killed. We don't know why. We know that we've programmed the system in a manner to try and minimize that. We could program in international humanitarian law. We could put in a whole series of side constraints. But we know that's how we program soldiers. So we say to them, these are things that you're not allowed to do. You've got to differentiate between civilians and militants. You've got to have a legitimate military target. You have to do some proportionality exercise to work out whether it's okay to engage in that military operation, knowing that there could be some collateral damage to civilians. And they make mistakes and they get it wrong, and maybe they even lie to us in court. Now, our black box technology, if we assume that it will lead to less rights violations, so we're not necessarily in a utilitarian calculus. We just say that the rules of law will be respected more often. But in those cases where they're not respected or where something goes wrong, we can't tell you why. And then there's a question of who do we hold responsible? Is it the state who put in the weapon system? Is it the weapon system itself? So if it's at a point of sophistication where you're dealing with something that looks conscious, in other words, there's a sense of deliberation going on, that it is able to, have a discussion with you in a way that something like ChatGPT can. Should we say, well, it is the system itself which is responsible? Now, it's unclear how we would hold it responsible, but we might think that it is the moral agent.
Okay, that is a universe. Let's tackle the problem. So first, it is true. So the fact that the algorithms that these systems operate with are known as black box algorithms. So even for the roboticists, for the programmers, it's impossible for them to understand what happened and how the data was processed. So it's true also that at the same time, there is a new paradigm of machine learning, which is called SHI, the explainable AI, that is being developed. Although, as normally the roboticists talk about these matters, they are not now facing a winter in the sense the research is getting to some limits and they are not developing or getting lots of results from explainable AI. So that is actually a very serious problem because normally we are used in order to find someone guilty, we tend to trace where the problem began, right? And here it seems that that possibility would be limited or even non-existent. Um, However, at the School of Oxford, and so I was also a researcher in Oxford at the Oxford Institute for Ethics and Laws of Armed Conflict. Actually, the AI Institute was developing for problems of the ChatGPT, more a European Union laws, what they call the control-factual algorithms. In my understanding, the laws of war, I think that the states need to advance to provide factual algorithms. And what is the factual algorithm? In order for these systems to be deployed and guarantee the normal standards of accountability, the algorithm has to be able to provide what were the facts that the algorithm took into consideration, like an algorithm tree. So otherwise, it's impossible to trace, and we end up scapegoating the machine. Or the other way around with judges, that is scapegoating military commanders or judges. Well, you decided to apply AI, so you are guilty because you chose this mechanism. Who said it that you could use this? So the scapegoating process can go both ways. Now, you said something that for me is slightly concerning, although there are some people writing on those terms, is talking about weapons with some kind of quasi agent. So they are not moral agents as we normally define them as a human being, but they have some level of autonomy and a kind of power of decision. So here, I think, is where my philosophical side and my roboticist side come in together. So first, um, when we understand what autonomous agent is and look into the philosophical perspective of what autonomy means, it means that is a person or an agent capable to explain his behavior. So, or give reasons to his behavior. So, for instance, I'm driving and a child just crossed in front of me and I turned the car against the wall. I didn't have time to think. I just react in that moment, but I'm able to explain why I turned the car against the wall. Now, and that is an autonomous person. First, we don't have that level of autonomy in AI, first of all. And second, I think, and here I'm very maybe conservative, let's say, but when I follow Stuart Russell's work and others, um, it's the computer doesn't decide anything. A decision is a moral decision. I decide based on facts what I think is the best solution. A system will optimize outcomes based on the data. It doesn't decide anything. It doesn't decide what is better or worse. It decides what is more optimal regarding the mission that was given to the system. So I just struggle, and I think that this is a problem between lawyers and roboticists. I was last year invited by the Dutch government, and we were what they call the 25 leading experts, so military philosophers, ethicists. lawyers and roboticists, and suddenly the one of the leader roboticists of Germany, delegate of the German government, said, "You lawyers are impossible because you don't get to definitions." And I told him, I said, "I'm sorry, you are just discussing with other roboticists that you haven't come to an agreement about what AI is. And you ask the lawyers to define AI if the experts don't know what AI is." So there is a problem here with definitions, and I think it's very important to. It's true that it's a very AI roboticist language that the computer decides and that the computer is autonomous, but for the legal language, the computer doesn't decide anything, and the computer is not autonomous. Or is only functionally autonomous. That is, the computer doesn't need a human intervention to develop some kind of functions. That is what autonomy is for legal terms. So that is my problem. I think we are far for considering the possibility of moral agents apart from humans on the battlefield. I find troubling that sometimes we start thinking about a future that we don't know today, and the law reacts to the present, tries to regulate the future, but reacts to the present. It's impossible for a lawyer to say, well, if in 20 years, if in 20 years old we develop um, a level of AI that allow us to talk about some kind of mind, then law needs to reflect against about the new reality. I just think that AI talks about superintelligence, but even the superintelligence doesn't mean having any kind of conscience. And sometimes people think the Terminator is coming and he's going to fall in love by the typical blue eyes, blonde American girl that is the dream of every man on earth. But we are far from that. And actually, even when we talk about super intelligence, we don't talk about an emotional side or capacity to balance different course of action.
So that is true. Superintelligence isn't necessarily containing a conscience. And Nick Bostrom writes in his book
Exactly.
Superintelligence about one way that you can reach superintelligence is actually just by combining many intelligent beings up to combining all of their intelligence to reach superintelligence. And I wonder if the military is already at that point where we have a combination of many intelligent minds who have agreed upon certain protocols and chains of command, and it's almost to the point that the conscience has already been removed. I mean, you do have certainly the president or some commander making decisions with hopefully with a conscience in mind, perhaps not. But that chain of command goes through so many hoops and ladders, so many different soldiers that at some point the conscience seems like it might just be removed. So for me, I struggle to see how different, again, autonomous weapon systems are, and that super intelligent weapon system might be compared to what looks like one of Nick Bostrom's definitions of super intelligence already existing in our military today.
Yes. So you evoked the great master, but so Nick Bostrom at certain point in his part in his book says something that is very relevant to what we are discussing here. And also, there is another, actually, he's Portuguese, but he is in the United States for many years, which is another roboticist, Pedro Domingos, who wrote this very famous book, Master Algorithm. So, the capacity that we will put all the knowledge in the world into an algorithm. But both authors, from different points of view, um, both authors called attention for the following. Even if we are able to create this master algorithm, all the information in the world, combining all the types of artificial intelligence. As Nick Bostrom and also Domingos call our attention is that it's impossible, at least until today, to teach these algorithms what is common sense. Now, common sense that we think that is a basic tool is actually on the battlefield very, very important, because a military commander is not just, uh, you know, a person that receives lots of medals because he knows a lot of laws of war. No, he's basically a man that, because of his experience on the battlefield, he uses common sense and his intuition in order to perform an attack, and hopefully according to the laws of war. So I know, to put this very basic, I know that chocolate is good, not because I had chocolate, but because of the experience of chocolate. That is, I experience the chocolate in my mouth, and then I have a second experience, and this is really good. I want to repeat this. So when we go to artificial intelligence, the common sense, the intuition how to perform when the situation is new, uh, to have experience of saying, I tried this before and it's wrong, and can lead us in this situation to disaster consequences, that is missing in the artificial intelligence. So I think, actually, to answer your question, Jimmy, because I think it's a very important point, I think sometimes with AI, we are getting tired of human weaknesses. And I think the problem of AI, more than the capabilities that AI will show, is that we are tired of a human that is not almighty in every single area of life. And you create ChatGPT, not allowing students to think and to build their own arguments and learn when they fail some premise or proposition. And I find that very troubling, because even if you're right, I think I have concerns with the extension of what you're saying. I think, and actually, I remember when I was in Geneva for the first time, when the conversation about autonomous weapon systems began in 2014, precisely the year I started my PhD. Christine Vignard, so the Director General of the UNIDIR, the UN delegation for disarmament, she said something that at the time it was kind of beautiful sentence, but now I think she is 100% right. She said, with autonomous weapons systems, we are discussing not weapons, but what it means to be human. And I think that artificial intelligence in general, or in healthcare, because we have problems with healthcare as well, data privacy, human rights, war. But AI is forcing us, and I hope in a good way, to think what exactly means to be human and what do we want from human beings. Because if we start thinking that humans cannot be imperfect or vulnerable, we will give spaces, human spaces, to AI that I think we will regret. And we are doing that already. For instance, the dating websites that all my students talk about. I'm not criticizing, but I'm saying we are delegating for machines the possibility of combining perfect profiles with the things that I think I will favor in another person. But what does that mean? What are we doing? We don't have time to meet people. And that, I think, it's very concerning. Okay, if you want to try AI, fine. Would you get married with the perfect woman that the AI system said, well, Jimmy, we found the perfect woman or the perfect partner for you? Would you marry her or him without meeting him? That is the thing. Right. Ready for another attack.
Yes. So I'm going to give you an argument about why AI might be much, much better than humans. So
Mm.
on the battlefield. So if you think about chess, right? It used to be the case that this was a domain solely run by humans, that the best chess players were humans, that the way to become a good chess player was, as you say, through developing intuitions. So playing a lot of games, memorizing various prior board states and other games, learning some chess theory. And then in the 90s, Deep Blue came along and beat the chess champ, right? And humans have never recovered. that there is no possibility of human beings ever being able to beat the best possible AI. But there was a feeling, well, chess is a certain kind of game where you can go and look at all these prior board states, so the AI can go and learn from that. But in games that are a bit more chaotic, that are different kind of warlike games like Go, well, the human beings are going to annihilate the machines. Until they didn't. And one way that the machines learn, from what I understand, is quite similar to what you referred to with the chocolate, is that you have some kind of reward punishment system, so that the machine, I think from what I recall, the Go machine didn't start off by learning Go. It started off in a more anarchic way. It did all sorts of unexpected, strange things, and then received punishments and rewards along the way, and then developed new things that human beings had never considered. And so we can imagine that the AI military commander would be so much more efficient than the human military commander. That general, as we say, is only able to fight the last war, right? They've got a limited pool of knowledge based on what they personally experience. So their sense of common sense is really narrow in that it's limited to what they've experienced and what they've studied. Maybe the conversations they've had, the books they've read, the history of warfare they've encountered. But that is minuscule in comparison to what the AI can learn. I know in a small way, for our show, we got offered to do a little radio ad for another show. And so I asked Jimmy and one of the other guys who works for the show to write up an ad. And then we thought, wonder how ChatGPT will do. And the advantage that ChatGPT has is that it's read every single radio ad ever. And it understands the language of radio in a way that it's very hard for a human being to do. And you can say to it, I don't really like that. Try again, try again, try again. Whereas if I do that to Jimmy, at some point he's going to punch me in the nose. So the level of sophistication from the AI is really impressive and is able to develop what we would think of as intuitions because of its vast experience. There's a further reason why we might think that AI is preferable, which is that we don't have to risk any human beings on the battlefield. So imagine the situation where we're fighting the terrorists, and the terrorists don't have the AI soldiers, and we do. And one, they're able to make all these incredible decisions in a lightning fast way, like the Go player or the chess player. And also, no one is going to die on our side. And it might be that we're able to very effectively eradicate the terrorists, and we'll kill some civilians along the way, as humans would. So it seems like we're able to protect our citizens very well. So if you think that one of the state's primary obligations is to protect its own citizens, that the AI is very useful on that front. The other one is that you have a nuclear deterrence style thing. So you can say, if states wind up in situations where they're able to generate AIs that are incredibly good killing machines, then both sides have a very strong incentive never to get into a war. In the same way that you have this incentive not to get into a war with someone who has nuclear weapons, because you both will annihilate each other, you might very well have this mutually assured destruction with different armies that have developed AI systems. There's a further iteration, which is that one way that you resolve conflicts might look a lot like how you would have in earlier times, where instead of getting your armies on a field to kill each other, you pick a champion. And you say, if my champion beats your champion, then you surrender. And maybe that's all you need to do is say, my AI would beat your AI. There's no point in us having this war, but I know that you could beat me, so I surrender.
Now, the problem is that chess in somehow has a limited set of rules. What we find on the battlefields is the unpredictability of the enemy. So, and here is where I think there's a terrible element that sometimes lawyers and so on, when we are discussing this, is no state will dare to deploy autonomous weapon systems that they are not able to control. Why is that? Because these systems will be highly vulnerable to hackers, for instance. And a state cannot afford to have a system that is deployed on a field that will be transformed in its own enemy. So I think the states, in the context of war, are very concerned with the vulnerability of these systems and that they can turn against the state that is deploying them. So actually, when people raise concerns and so on, I say the states will be the first interest to perform all the legal reviews in order to be sure, or at least to have a certain level of trust that this system won't become our enemy. So that is, I think, on the field of war, is a big insurance. Now, uh, then you said something about the states have the right to protect their own citizens. True. However, the way states understand the protection of their own nationals, as you know, differs a lot around the world. For instance, the conception, for instance, of Russia or North Korea or even some Latin countries is that the state is above their nationals, the interests of the state. If we look to some European countries, the individual is more important than the state. For instance, in terms of what an AI system can gather in terms of data, according to the state, we have completely different laws. For instance, in Europe, as you know, all the GDPR is very limited in what the states can gather, the information that states can gather from their own nationals, because of the notion of an individual in relation to the state. The Anglo-Saxon countries have the interests of the community, not of the individual citizen. And this, for instance, in the laws against terrorism, we have states fighting terrorism in completely different ways because of their own national constitutional perspective. And so I think that is important. Now, regarding deterrence and troops on the ground, which I think is very important, and rescue soldiers. So I think deterrence is a very strong argument, because it's like the nuclear weapons operate. And in that sense, you know, when we have at the moment, I believe, 30 states or 31 states asking for a preemptive ban of autonomous weapon systems. One of the reasons I'm against the ban is that, you know, some states will have these systems. And so there is a political argument, if you want to call it that way, that states need to have a comparable level of technology, because otherwise the deterrence doesn't exist. So the ban, I understand some of the arguments in terms of human dignity, but I think in terms of political interests of the states is inevitable. Now, I never came across anyone, military commanders, armed forces, and for instance, last year I was in Israel also to discuss autonomous weapon systems. Until now, as far as I know, I might be wrong, there is no army that will exclude armed forces from the ground. So autonomous weapon systems will be a kind of a team element. So until now, and that excludes some kind of scenarios. Now, you said rescuing the soldiers. Let's think about that possibility. Rescuing the soldiers. Yes, but will these machines also be able to detect elements of surrender, for instance, which is very important in the laws of war? For instance, to understand when another party wants to stop, when they raise the white flag or whatever they do, to say that they want to surrender. So that will be also another problem. And I think, because of the argument of deterrence, that states will have these systems, at least if you mess with me, I have weapons to mess with you. There is also something about the autonomous weapon systems that states are very, very concerned. There's two things that we cannot control. One is actually the black box algorithm. In certain point we cannot control. The other thing that we cannot control is the unpredictability of the enemy. And as in the chess, the modern players can twist the intuition of the AI player on chess. The states that will have this type of technology, and especially non-state actors, they will know how also to play with these systems. And I think we won't have ever the perfect weapon. because the perfect weapon presupposes a defeated enemy, and the enemy by nature will study the enemy very, very well. You know, it's amazing, for instance, in this modern conflict between the Houthis and the UK and the United States. We know the UK as well, but talking about the United States, one of the strongest armed forces in the world. And at the same time, they cannot prevent their own military facilities of being targeted and discovered, let alone, let's not talk about how Israel was surprised by the attacks of Hamas in the 7th of October. So, and this also reveals to us that they won't be the perfect weapon that knows everything, that will act preventively, preventing any kind of an attack, because the human mind supersedes a
One common trope is that these autonomous weapon systems might not even be in the hands of the government. It might actually be in control of the billionaires like Elon Musk, who already has more satellites up above us right now than I think any government on the earth. So, do you foresee that the people controlling these weapon systems will be the government, or will they be billionaires? Or, I mean, I think best case scenario, will they be just everyday civilians with their own set of bodyguards, autonomous bodyguards? And
Mm,
and I have to preface this with the fact that I'm, the only American host on the show. So that's very American of me to ask this question.
right. So the example you gave is about outer space and satellites. And I think if we look to the Outer Space Treaty of 67 and all the non-binding agreements between states, one thing is it's absolutely certain, I think it's the Article 6 of the treaty, that although outer space is open to privates, the state is absolutely responsible, strict liability for whatever happens on the outer space with private devices. So if it is true, and also, for instance, the United States has the outer space tourism. So, but if anything happens, the state where the system is registered is automatically and directly liable for whatever happens on outer space. So in the sense that then how the state will make agreements with the private is another matter, but internationally, the state shows as the responsible entity for whatever happens. Now, regarding drones and technology of war, I think actually the problem is more serious, because anyone can buy a sophisticated drone, or even a normal drone. These ones that are able to record weddings now. And now we see all the weddings, but and for someone who knows about technology and a little bit of munitions, and it's not difficult to get that knowledge. If we look to the quantity of terrorists that we have that really are experts in weaponry. So it's very easy to go to a supermarket or a warehouse where these drones are sold, and you buy one of these and adapt to a weapon. And that, I think, even if the state produces how many laws the state wants to do, actually these systems nowadays are available to anyone who wants to create a weapon. It's more or less the new Molotov cocktail, that you could produce at home with things that you would buy in a supermarket. Now you have a drone, is used to register a wedding, but suddenly you have a terrorist and you have a wedding, like the United States target ISIS fighters during a wedding, and you're having a wedding with the daughter of the president of the United States, whoever it is, and you have this, and suddenly you have an Al Qaeda fighter that is a fake photographer, and he kills all people. How this will be controlled by states is a matter of national security, and how the state will develop mechanisms of surveillance and so on. For instance, is not um, it should be taken into consideration when we say that London is the safest city in the world, because when we see the level of CCTV cameras the detectors of weapons on the roads and so on. So the British authorities have a precise notion of what is going on the streets of London that no other government has. However, the last attacks, this car that goes against people on the Westminster Bridge, it was a terrorist attack, but it could be a normal civilian that had a heart attack and, lost the control of the car and kills people, innocent people on the bridge. And it wasn't a criminal act. So there is a level of control that no state will ever have because precisely of the human mind. And the human mind is very creative, and AI is getting to the level of creativity. And this is where the roboticists are calling our attention that we should not open autonomous weapon systems to that level of creativity. And I think it's, when we have more than 2,000 roboticists and the most important roboticists in the world signing this letter against autonomous weapon systems, people work with AI all day. I think we should be concerned what exactly they are trying to tell the world when that we are in favor of AI, but in weapons it will be a bad strategy. So I think these signs are very important to take into consideration, I think.
So if I think about two issues that Jimmy raised, the one is that in a large army, it's very hard to say that there's a conscience because what you've done is separate out all the tasks among lots and lots of people. So
Mhm.
no particular individual seems like they do the bad thing, they just contribute towards it. And the second is this idea of these micro autonomous weapon systems that aren't necessarily run by a state, but could be run by a vast number of private individuals. There's a fantastic episode of Black Mirror called Hated in the Nation. And there, what you have are these, they call ADIs, these little insect drones, and they're not run by any person in particular. Basically, from what I recall, there's a Twitter account, and people who behave badly can get cancelled, and the drones go after them. And you might say that every particular individual who puts in the hashtag of that person's name doesn't bear enough responsibility for the murder, because it takes tens of thousands of them, to send through the drones to agree on this person. But nonetheless, someone dies. And no particular individual holds responsibility, and no particular little robot B could have been sufficient to have committed the murder. It's the collective that does it. And maybe there's something terrifying about that. In other words, it's not a terrorist organization, it's not a state, it's just a collection of individuals not acting in concert that can cause these terrible things to occur with the assistance of AI.
So, regarding the collective mind versus separated minds, individuals, there is an American military lawyer who writes a lot on these topics, Jeffrey Korn, that he says that actually soldiers are the true autonomous weapons. So they are trained to engage, not to think, and just to engage the enemy. It's a fascinating argument, isn't it? Because we say, yes, if we look to the soldier, and the soldier it tries not to develop empathy for the enemy, and he goes and he shoots every time he finds a combatant of the other side. However, when he says that he's an autonomous weapon, I wonder if Professor Korn is actually talking about autonomous in the terms of roboticists or autonomous in the legal terms. Because a soldier, when he receives and he understands that he's receiving an unlawful order, he has the obligation, the legal obligation, not to obey to his military commander. So, in spite of the fog of the war, a individual soldier, when he understands that the order will conduct his actions to a war crime, the soldier needs not to obey. He must not obey to the order. So as we saw in the Nuremberg trials, the argument presented by the German soldiers was we were obeying orders. Well, obeying orders do not subtract you for your moral responsibility. So it's true what you said, and I think it's a very important question of a collective thinking, let's say, and individual thinking. But actually, sometimes this is another problem if the law demands what a human cannot do. In the sense, for instance, you have, 100 soldiers on the ground and requiring that each individual soldier think if his action is immoral or not immoral, is lawful or not lawful. Well, I leave that question aside. Regarding the swarm technology, so the possibility of we having these armies of micro drones, and Human Rights Watch produce also these films showing this. I think you are absolutely right. And I think that is what roboticists are calling our attention. Uh, we need to be very cautious how we open the door to this kind of AI that doesn't find any boundaries, and it can start selecting according to their own criteria, their targets, right? And I think it doesn't need necessarily to be killing people, but you can destroy a person in a more soft way. You can interfere with the bank accounts. You can destroy the person medical record. It's one of the strategies to fight terrorists. Is we know when they are in hospitals is to check what substances they are allergic and to change what they can have or not have prescribed by the doctor and change that in the screen of the computer. So sometimes people think it's just about killing, but you have other ways of destroying a person that do not involve lethal force because AI allows that.